Hi, you're listening to the Photofocus podcast. My name is Rich Harrington, and this is the September 25th edition. Joining me is our co-host, Scott Bourne. How you doing, Scott?
Hey, Rich, very excited today. We've got the man himself, Joe McNally, joining us a little bit later in the podcast. It's not very often that you get Joe McNally on the Photofocus podcast, so that's exciting. And we're fresh off our trip from Photoshop World. There's some new camera news. There's lots to talk about today.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some cool gear, and there are a whole bunch of other opportunities coming up for those of you who are getting around. There'll be another photo trade show coming up soon. But yeah, we looked at some brand new equipment. Plus, there's also a new camera that was announced. Why don't we start with the camera that I didn't get a chance to see yet, but I know you've looked into, and that is the new Nikon D600.
I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I can't review a camera I haven't shot with because, well, I'm not one of those guys. But I can tell you, based on specs, it looks like what the D800 should have been. Now I know you and I disagree on this. And I'm still even a little disappointed, but it's a full-frame sensor, which is important.
Yeah.
It's a 24.3 megapixel sensor. Now, my 1DX is not that big and is doing great. Again, Nikon seems to have re-engaged in the megapixel wars, but at least it's 12 megapixels smaller than the D800. I think this is where the D800 should have been. I'm very excited about that. It's got the new XP3 processor, which means it's got a lot of the same technology as the D800 and the D4. You'll be excited to know that they've upped the video resolution to 1080p HD.
Yep. We had that on some of the cameras. The D800 had that too, but a lot of the earlier Nikons didn't have as many frame rates. The 7000 had a couple of, like, only 24p for 1080, so it's nice that you got more choices. It's going to sound silly, but I'm just glad that it's a sealed body. I've really come to like the fact that a little bit more rugged body, a little bit of basic weatherproofing. Not that I like standing in the rain, but, having played with cameras that aren't, I don't want to go, oh, it's raining, let me protect my camera. It's kind of nice to just know that you can trust it.
And on the video side, I'm very good to see that it has the stereo mic and a headphone input.
Yeah. Well, the headphone output is cool because nobody else is really doing this. See, here's the big gotcha that everybody doesn't talk about. Yeah, you could run a mic in, great. Nikon on the D800, and it carried down to this. You actually have 20 different setting levels for the mic. So you could adjust up or down the sensitivity while you're recording to make sure that you have consistent volume. But what you don't get on most other cameras is the actual ability to hear it until you are playing it back later. You go, oh, wow, that sounded terrible. I didn't realize that my mic cable crossed the electrical cable and all I hear is this the whole time.
Every time Canon does this a lot, every time I see a camera that doesn't have a way to hook headphones to it that touts its video, I wonder if it wasn't designed by a league of morons. Clearly, it's a bunch of people who've never done any field work with a camera. Because if you can't monitor the audio, Rich, how can you possibly know what you're getting?
You don't until after the fact, and then it's usually too late. And so one of the most popular sayings in the video industry is audio is half the picture. And all they're getting at there is if you have terrible sound, people will not watch your video even if they care about it. So it's nice that you got that control. And, we have more frame rates to choose from. I think it's closest camera body that a lot of people are saying that they're really similar matched is the Mark III from Canon. I don't know if you think that this is a step below, but the fact that it is a full frame sensor and it's really, really affordable. I've been a big fan.
It's $2,100 and the Mark III is $3,500. So I think it probably is a step below. I'm sure it's a step below when it comes to autofocus. There's only 39 autofocus points on this camera. I'm sure that they did that on purpose so as not to compete with their higher end bodies. So from an autofocus point of view, it's a step down. I have no idea what the files look like because we haven't shot with the camera yet. It has a pretty wide ISO range from 100 to 6400, expandable to 25/600, which tells me that it's probably not going to perform as well as the 5D Mark III in low light, and it has so many megapixels. How could it? But is the 5D Mark III, $1,400 better? Probably not.
And what's nice here is that Nikon, I mean, obviously these cameras are in the works, but it seems like, and I almost don't want to say this because I'll probably curse it, but maybe they actually listened to some of the criticism and they said, oh, let's make sure when we come out with the dumbed down version of our current camera that's a little bit more affordable, meant to be an entry level for enthusiasts or emerging pros, let's still keep some of the best technologies and just scale them back a little bit. But, it's nice that they didn't just go, oh, let's just take an old camera and put a new sticker on it, or let's just, cut the megapixels in half. At least they tried to balance out the camera and give you a lot of the newer tech that's been getting worked on.
Yeah, they've got their 3D color matrix on this. Anyway, one more thing to mention, the codec is MPEG-4 or AVCH 2.M. It's basically .264.
AVC HD is just another version, very space efficient, which is nice. Yeah, there's different ones, and they've been doing that.
Remember, the old Nikons used to use JPEG compression, which was no bueno.
Actually, it was even worse than that. They had AVI files for a while, which was like a format that even Microsoft said, "Boy, this sucks so bad, we'll just stop using it." So
I'm going to tell you right now, this could be a sleeper camera at $2,100. We'll get one in our hands here at Photofocus as soon as we can.
Do you think this has the potential to knock off the D7000?
Oh yeah, the D7000 is a great camera, but when you can buy this, I think everybody's going to jump to this.
Okay.
Before we move on to some of the stuff we saw at Photoshop World on the floor that we liked in the way of gear, I do want to take a moment to thank borrowlenses.com, where you will be able to rent this very camera as soon as it's available. I'm going to guess within probably the time you hear this podcast, they will have it available for rent. Also want to thank viewbug.com, Borrow Lenses and Viewbug, sponsors of the Photofocus show and the blog. At Viewbug, you can enter photo contest. You can enter our $10,000 photo contest. Information on that at the open contest tab on photofocus.com. Viewbug is a great place to enter contests, win prizes, show off your work. And Borrow Lenses is a great place to rent anything you can think of related to cameras. We appreciate that. Now, Rich, when we were on the show floor, you pointed out a technology to me that I was frankly unaware of called
Perfectly Clear.
Perfectly Clear. Oh yeah, I was trying to make a joke. It didn't work. And how did you find this technology?
I actually discovered them at an earlier Photoshop World, but it's an interesting technology in that it's been around for a long time, but it was never directly available to you. Previously, like when you uploaded your photos to one of the many different websites that do online printing, and I don't want to list them all, but I went and I met with the Perfectly Clear folks, and they showed me the list of who uses their technology, and it was like 95% of the market. When you upload the picture, and if you don't say, don't touch my photo, don't optimize the color, don't make any changes, especially for a lot of the more consumer and enthusiast sites, this is the software that automates and fixes tons of camera sins to make the pictures more ready for print. And I just saw it, and they had rolled out a plugin, and they have it for different host applications. And I saw it, and I'm like, I can actually see a difference. And unlike other filters, it's not a gimmick. It's not a filter to try to give you an artistic look or anything else. It's just kind of like, okay, make it better. And so for those of you who like the clarity slider, this is like another thing sort of in that realm that just makes the pictures sharper and better exposures and better color. What did you think about it?
Well, it is amazing. It is used by a lot of labs. In fact, I would bet every member of our audience already uses it one way or another. I mean,
they just don't know it.
Yeah. If you upload, like, for instance, let's say you go to Walmart or a lot of those kind of places, all of those labs already use it. It's built into, believe it or not, one of our favorite iPhone apps, Camera Awesome.
Yeah.
This is the technology that drives Camera Awesome.
Yeah.
That's why that's such a good iPhone app. And by the way, these people make iPhone and Android apps as well. But it's a one-button kind of correction. The average correction in this software is 10 seconds, Rich. Now, it's not for people who are Photoshop experts and want to really dig in and do a lot of stuff. It's for people who either A, don't want to learn a lot of Photoshop and just want one-button corrections to all the basic things you always need to correct, because there's some nice presets that get you 90% of the way there. It's also for studios with big workflows, like let's say school photographers where they're shooting thousands of pictures a week. If they were to spend even 5 minutes on each photo, You can imagine what that would do to them. So they need 10 seconds on a photo and out. So that's what this is for. So it's somewhere in that curve. It's affordable. Right now they have a special for $120. It's going to go up to $199 eventually. That may be a little pricey for it, but at $120, it's a good deal. Works with Lightroom, works with Photoshop currently, and then works with all the mobile phones. But if you're looking for something where you just need to do a lot of workflow, you're a wedding photographer, sports photographer, kids photographer, student photographer, and you need to do it quick, or if you just don't want to learn how to use all these advanced programs and plugins like some of the stuff that comes from Nick, this is one I think is worth taking a look at. You also looked at a backup solution at Photoshop World, Rich, for Lightroom?
Yeah, I was excited. I had a chance to sit down over breakfast with the folks at a company called Mosaic Archive, and I like their attitude. They've got a cool product. It works with Lightroom, and what it allows you to do is it basically automates backing up your library to the cloud, and it does offsite storage, and it does what's really cool. It actually looks at your Lightroom keywords and the collections you have and recreates it digitally. So it gives sort of two purposes. You have the ability to use an iPad app or a web browser to go through and access your images online, and it makes it really easy to see those. But then you also can choose to back up the original files. Now they have a model, I think it's about 2,000 images that they let you do for free, which is a pretty robust trial. But you can then, the idea is that this is a completely automated workflow. So you decide how many images you want backed up. There's different plans to choose from, and then it just runs. And I know, Scott, one of the concerns you had when you moved from Aperture to over to Lightroom, and most photographers have, is, I'd really like a good way for backup. Or, I do backup, but, it'd be great if I just quickly imported some images and I forgot, or I didn't get a chance to run that backup yet, if it went ahead and did it for me. And then the fact that you can actually browse and share these images was really quite cool. It was a very elegant app.
I think that's very exciting. We're going to need to see more of that kind of stuff, because we hear about people that say, I got a backup. And I'm like, well, what do you do? Well, I've got a second drive right on my desk with all my images. And I'm like, let me just ask you a couple of quick questions. Let's say there's a fire. How's that going to work for you?
Yeah.
You have a third location at least. And this is an opportunity to do that. And there were a lot of things on the floor, but that's one that was probably something that most people should have paid attention to.
Well, how much storage do you have on your catalog right now? Like how many terabytes do you have on your desk?
On my main desk, or on my little desk?
Okay, on the working desk that you work at the most, not your master archive, because you've been shooting for years, and you treat backup like a religion, which is great.
I have 60 terabytes on the big one, 12 on the small one.
Okay, so they've got plans that are pretty cool. Like they got like an 11 terabyte plan that does backups for about the cost of buying a drive, and it's pretty cool. I think what I like. The other thing that made me feel good is, and I don't want to open up a can of worms here, but I asked them the hard question that's on a lot of people's minds. Say, well, where exactly are these servers? He said, oh no, we're not using other third-party servers. We have our own servers under lock and key, and we own them. It's like, okay, I feel better, because there's a lot of companies using a couple of main vendors out there for online storage, and then you're adding an extra layer of complexity when you don't know where the backups are.
Well, I will say there's a counter argument to that, which is you want to look at the company pretty in depth and make sure their financials are strong and they're not going anywhere, because most people do rely on Amazon S3, which has had a couple of problems here or there, but generally over time is rock solid, and Amazon's definitely not going anywhere. So there's a plus and a minus to that. But I do think that as long as you're not relying on it as your sole backup, there's little to risk. It's just sort of that extra little step that you can take to make sure that you're covered. Hey, before we get to this incredible interview with one of the best photographers, teachers, and thought leaders in our industry, I want to also say some other thank yous to SmugMug, who has been a sponsor of the show. This is the last show that they'll be sponsoring. We've appreciated being with them for the last 18 months. Maybe it's 24 months. It's a long time. They've sponsored a show, and they've done a great job for us, and they host photographs and help you sell them. You should definitely check them out at smugmug.com. I also want to make sure that we mention the Ice Society. Jerry Quinones is the world's best wedding photographer, in my opinion, and in many other people's opinion. He's won just about every award you can win. He's in Australia, but also in LA. He has this thing called the Ice Society. You can click on the banner there at the photofocus.com homepage and get a special discount. If you are interested in weddings, portraits, families, anything like that, you'll learn more from Jerry than you will probably just about anybody else in the world. We also have a code on the site in some of our posts for Kelby training. We want to mention that. So be sure to check out all of the sponsors. They're all listed right there on photofocus.com with posts from both Rich and I, 365 days a year, 7 days a week, and it has been going strong since November 2nd, 1998. We have stuff there every week. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to give us an email or credit card. You don't have to buy anything. It's just free info. You can get it via RSS. Our podcasts are every 10 days, the 5th, the 15th, and the 25th. And you can follow us both on Twitter, Rich at RedPixel, RedPixel, and me at Scott Bourne. And I'm now very excited, Rich, because I want to step off here and listen to your interview with the great Joe McNally.
Yeah, Joe had a lot of great things to say and really spoke with passion. So make sure you dig in and enjoy some of the great things that he has to share about the business of photography. So we had a chance to sit down here with Joe McNally. I know our listeners are very interested in hearing from you, Joe, and we are at Photoshop World. What excites you about Photoshop World?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it, Rich. And Photoshop World is an interesting gathering. You're looking at somebody who's not any good at Photoshop, and yet I am here, which is kind of, maybe a little bit of a head spin. But I was invited very graciously by Scott Kelby and the folks who put this on a number of years ago, and I think it's become, for me and for lots of folks, an indispensable calendar item, something that you don't want to miss. It's got probably the widest range of talents assembled in terms of its diversity. There's Photoshop guys, of course. There's HDR people. There's wildlife and landscape people. There's flash people. There's all of this, and even some specialty kind of nooks and crannies of the photographic repertoire are here. So if you come here as an attendee, you've got kind of a smorgasbord. You can pick and choose.
And when you are deciding at a conference what you're going to teach, you have a lot of years of professional experience. Why don't we start there? Most folks have experienced you through some of your lighting tutorials, the books you've written. You have a very prolific blog. But to give folks a little bit of background, sometimes people forget that the people that are teaching actually do have professional experience. What have been some of the most enjoyable projects you've had a chance to work on?
Well, those are thankfully pretty numerous. I've been at this, as you indicate, a long time. And the early going of my career was kind of the usual path, or a typical path, let's call it that, where I went through newspapers and wire services, kind of embraced color, realized I had a pretty decent imagination, and vectored away from news photography into magazines and more feature work, portraiture, that type of thing. And, I did a number of things over the years that I can always remember fondly. First big project I ever did for Sports Illustrated ran 38 pages in Sports Illustrated, which was an amazing amount of space. It was a story about Indiana high school basketball. Perfect story for me. It's not, one of the big athletes. I don't gravitate towards that sort of celebrity type of thing all that much. It was about these kids who played for the love of the game. Moving on, I became a staff photographer at Life magazine. I have a long history with Life, and I was able to do a couple of interesting things for them. The passing of the Olympics reminded me of the what we did at Life, which was my proposal to take the clothes off the Olympic team, which was scandalous back at the time. Now it's sort of, very accepted.
You had such perfect form to work with there.
Oh, God, the Olympic body is, there's a reason those folks go to the Olympics. That's why you and I are sitting here and we're not at the Olympics, But yeah, I've been blessed. It's been a varied career. I've done everything from politics to news to conflict to celebrities to covers to long features. I have an ongoing 26-year history with the National Geographic. Just finished a couple stories for them. So I've been really, really fortunate over the years to get work that my imagination would have perhaps conjured up anyway.
Well, I think a lot of folks, when they're looking at that, particularly the magazines, that seems like a goal that's unattainable to many photographers. And, if I didn't have that opportunity, or if I had that right equipment, or if I got called for that, what is it that keeps bringing you back to that world? What is it that the magazines are looking for in the photographer?
Well, I think there is a number of characteristics of, quote unquote, the magazine photographer or the longtime journalist. If you have a career that, maintains over quite a span, that aren't completely evident. You can talk about photographic technique or photographic gear and all that sort of stuff, and those are all extremely important. But what underlies that is durability. The ability just to sustain, tenacity, that willingness to not let go even when things are not particularly good, as they oftentimes are for any photographer. There's also kind of a mix of personality that you have to bring to the fore. When you're going to survive, you have to be able to relate to a client. You have to be able to collectively, pull together a coherent bid. You have to marshal resources. You have to know how to produce a job. All these things happen, and they're very unglamorous, and they all go on behind the curtain, and then you see this photograph. And the photograph might look somewhat simple, and hopefully it is, or hopefully that's part of its appeal. But behind the scenes, lots of different things came into play. And I think some folks maybe have an anticipation of getting into this business and don't completely know how varied and difficult the skill set is to survive over the long haul.
So to that end, a lot of people don't realize the work behind photography. You have worked with assistants through the years. You shoot on your own. What's a lesson that you say? I think a lot of people are bypassing the apprenticeship stage these days. Everybody thinks, why do I need to mentor under someone? Or, I'm just going to figure this out on my own. Everything's on the internet anyways. What do you say, to that? What should people be looking for if they have that opportunity to take the time?
Well, I think there is just a world of information out there, for sure. And you can learn a great deal from the internet, from classes, etc. I think real-time experience is invaluable. I look at the example of Drew Gurian, who's a very fine photographer. He was a good photographer when he came to me as an assistant. He's been with me 4 years now. And I can see the point where he's going to segue into his own career, and that's coming, in the fairly short term. And I think what has happened with him, he had these skills, the skill set, which, folks have out there, but what it was not leavened with was the idea of road experience and equipment organization, making sure that, everything from, the taxis to the planes and the times and the arrivals and the rental cars and all that sort of stuff that has to hook up on location, that could be kind of daunting sometimes. Some folks actually have had assistants who are like all sorts of hellfire and brimstone, I'm going to go do this, and they've worked with me for 2 or 3 months and they turn around and say, this isn't for me. There's an emotional stress. I missed a bunch of my kids growing up. I was off in places like Africa. Sometimes for the Geographic, I'd go to Africa and I couldn't even get a phone call out, for 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time. That has changed now with technology, but it's still stressful just to be detached, to oftentimes be in a culture where you're not all that familiar with people. You don't know the language. Oftentimes your fixer or your translator is the only person you can talk to. These are things that kind of bombard you, and you have to be pretty durable and pretty resilient about that sort of stuff.
Well, one of the things I've noticed taking a workshop with you, watching you teach, and just interacting with you personally, is that you have an incredible ability to engage your subjects. You bring them to life. You seem genuinely interested in them. You obviously have passionate areas of photography. Describe that importance there of getting to know your subject before you try to photograph your subject.
Well, Rich, you use the phrase genuine interest. That is so key. People can tell if you're tossing this off. You have to be sincerely curious and interested in your fellow human being. And I am. I'm a very curious person. I like looking into all sorts of worlds. Jay Maisel, a very famous photographer, has said that being a photographer is a license to steal experience. In other words, you don't get to be so much of an expert about any one thing, but you get to gloss over this entire range of different worlds. And I'm actually going to do a blog very soon called Geniuses I Have Known. Because of, just by virtue of having a camera in your hand, you are invited into someone's world, and that person oftentimes is amazing at what they do. And that is a tremendous gift. So whether you're photographing the guy on the street or, the next president of the United States, or whoever that may be, I think research is important. You have to really do your background, checking on people, get some information about them. There's invariably something about people out there that you can, latch onto for conversation purposes that might feed the imagination for a picture, And it also convinces someone that hey, wait a minute. Yeah, this person actually is really interesting. This person knows I have 3 kids. This person knows that, in 1995, I was the first, guy to break the sound barrier, or whatever it might be, something significant. You have to be able to project a comfort zone for someone. And part of that is the fact that you are really seriously curious about them, interested in them, and you'll take care of them. You're going to do your best behind the camera.
So throughout all of this, you've seen a tremendous shift in technology. I look at cameras that we used to have, cameras that I used as a kid when I sat next to my dad and, was learning photography as a hobby, and the costs that were involved and the wait time to, okay, let's go get a contact sheet made. All right, we're going to pick out 1 or 2 prints we could afford to get printed. Mm-hmm. And now I look at my son, and I put an old D90 in his hands that was doing nothing, and he's I gave it to him when he was 5, and I'm looking at the pictures and I'm like, wow, they're just, I don't know if they're seeing things different or just there's no fear. How has technology changed your photography, and how is it changing how we approach photography in general?
It's a two-edged sword, like so much of this stuff. The technology is a great and good thing. Makes our lives better, makes photography more accessible, more available to people. It makes it more out of an immediate experience. So it becomes sort of this visceral kind of thing where you have the impact almost right away, as opposed to waiting for the Kodachrome to get processed.
Does it make people sloppy?
I think if you're not predisposed to be careful,
there isn't that cost involved of, oh boy, next time I'm going to actually double check my settings before I spent $60 on film that I just blew out.
Yeah, there is the immediacy of and the ubiquitous nature of digital imagery has, and I hope folks don't take this the wrong way, because I feel exactly opposite, but it can have the effect of cheapening or minimizing the difficulty factor and the, it's just a picture. Pictures, I firmly believe, are very important. Pictures are still photography. It constitutes my sense of history, for sure. Absolutely. My memory is fixed in still imagery. And I think that's a human thing. I don't think it's necessarily a generational thing. For me, anyway, it's been true. So on one level, is it wonderful in that the gates of photography have been thrown open to many more thousands and thousands of people who would otherwise have been reluctant or have abandoned it, just by virtue of being forced to set up a darkroom in their bathtub.
Or their spouses would have kicked them out of it.
Exactly. So that all is a wonderful thing. And the free flow of information and the immediacy and all of that is just fantastic. I love it. On the other hand, the underlying mission of being a photographer has not changed. And I always say this, our main goal, no matter what genre or type of work we do, is to be a good storyteller. And that's a hard thing to do. It was hard back with Matthew Brady, and it's hard now with, a fancy D4 in your hands, So all of that has changed, but the core mission has remained the same. And that, there's a thing about technology, I think, it doesn't make photography easier. It facilitates. The facility of photography is now multifaceted and wonderful and quote-unquote easy. But the mission of a photographer remains a pretty challenging one.
I think some of the some of the tasks that were technical or time-consuming have been removed in many ways, but the core skill of putting the time in to find the shot, to discover it, to build your skills up for composition, that doesn't go away. So where do you look for inspiration, either in the photo world or outside of the photo world? You know, you've had a long, successful career. You keep growing in your photography. How do you keep that spark going? Where do you look so that you don't feel like the well is drying out?
Good question. You can run into rough patches or, dry wells, as you say, during the course. You will. It's a given when you do anything creative. I find a touchstone for me is there's a bunch of books. I've got tons of photo books, and I'm interested in lots of different work. But I have to admit there is a kind of a core group of books that I started out with that I kind of go back to every once in a while, just to clear my head, just to refresh a little bit, remind myself of why I'm doing this despite its degree of difficulty, and I celebrate those people who created that work, who are represented by those books, the ones who have gone before. So I have a deep reverence for, people like W. Eugene Smith or Carl Maidans or Gordon Parks, Ernst Haas, people like this. Ernst did a book called The Creation. I go back to, there's a member of Magnum, Danny Lyon. He did a book called Conversations with the Dead many years ago. These are books that are hard to get now, a little bit anyway. I just did an interview myself with David Douglas Duncan. And he's a name that many young photographers probably aren't aware of, but he is, more than any photographer, responsible for putting Nikon cameras on the map because of his use of Nikkor lenses during the Korean War. And he's 96 now, and I was sent over to the south of France to interview him, and we have history because he was a staff photographer at Life magazine as well, and we've known each other glancingly throughout the years, and it was just a very warm-hearted and wonderful encounter again. And he is still shooting. He's shooting cool pics at the age of 96. And he said something wonderful to me that boiled photography down into, it was like going to confession, not to be too Catholic about it, but he looked at me and he said, "Look, Joe," I was approaching him in very laudatory terms and saying wonderful things about him as I couched my questions, and he said, "Joe, that's a bunch of bullshit." And he goes, "Look, I'm a photographer, okay? People do things, I take pictures. Sometimes I get it, and sometimes I miss it." I'm like, wow. You mean it's okay to miss it? And here's a great photographer saying he misses it, and that's so true. We all miss it. Life is ongoing. We have a camera, this mechanical device in our hands. There's no way we're going to always get everything or even a small percentage of everything that we want to get, and it can be very frustrating. But I look back to those giants, and I look through that work because it's not only a source of inspiration, but it's also a source of peace.
Last thing for you, if you could offer some practical advice to those who feel like, well, maybe I want to make this a career. You've had a career that has let you go into several different areas. Any lessons learned or things you would say to someone who is getting ready to try to embark and make photography a profession?
Sure. Some of what you could apply to photography is generic. You could apply it to the starting of any career. On that level, you have to have a sense of business, and you have to have a business plan, and you have to understand that photography isn't a lark, that you have to be paid money for it, or you will rapidly cease to be able to do it.
And you have to assign an hourly rate that's not assuming you're working 40 hours a week.
Exactly. You have to, understand that it's a potentially very iffy proposition. And first and foremost, I think you have to be comfortable with uncertainty, a certain level of being on the tightrope all the time. Don't know exactly where the next paycheck is coming from. If you have a mindset that can accommodate that, okay. If you're a person who seeks security and stability and a regular nature to their life, maybe this isn't the thing for you to do. The other thing, many things obviously, but go into this with your eyes wide open and know that this is, as they always say, a marathon, not a sprint. Know that there will be tremendous levels of disappointment, and those valleys, if you will, are more numerous probably than the peaks. Also, start small. Be very careful about debt. Okay, try not to run yourself into the ground chasing the next great piece of equipment, because that's the key that will unlock the door to the great picture vault. It ain't. Okay, so all those practical considerations to the side. Try to drive yourself towards shooting what you love. If you shoot something that truly resonates with you, it'll hopefully resonate with others. If you bring that to the attention of people who actually buy or commission photography, they will hopefully recognize that and assign you, hopefully, over time, to do that which you love. And that becomes nirvana, when you actually get to a point where you're shooting what you love to shoot and getting paid for it. That's kind of, where it hums along very well. Those states of harmonic, wonderful peace are only occasional. I still shoot things that, obviously might not be the most thrilling jobs in the world, but I have a studio to keep going. You have to realize there's food for the table and food for the soul, and accept that equation going in.
Is there any other practical advice you'd like to offer folks listening?
Always use f8.
That's right, yeah. There's a magic setting on the camera. If you choose it, your pictures will look just like Joe McNally's. I've been on a workshop with you, and standing in the exact same conditions, and I can absolutely assure people it has nothing to do with the settings on the camera and everything to do with the person taking the picture. I mean, I've been amazed at how people will sit there and read on photography blogs, and they want to see every single setting you used and what lens did you use, what did you do this. It's not about that, is it?
No, that's very true. The technique has to underlie, the craft has to underlie the art. You have to have a good bedrock, and that could also be a level of practical advice that I would offer is don't sail into this without having the underpinnings of technical skills that will sustain you when you get that curveball of a job that's thrown at you. And now there's money on the table, and the client says, I was thinking that we don't really want to just do single headshots. Let's do a group portrait of all 30 or 40 of our staff in one picture. And it's like, they didn't tell me that,
I only brought one light.
So, these things happen. So that the craft has to be grappled with, to be sure. But at the end of the day, it is about what you see and why you see it and the way you see it. And that will differentiate you. If you stay that course, you will find a sliver or modicum of difference between you and the tons of other photographers that are out there.
And Joe, so our listeners who want to learn more about you and your photography, what's the best place? Your blog? Probably
my blog. It's a little bit erratic, like me, but it's joemcnally.com/blog. And I went a little light with it for a while there during the summer. I kind of eased off because, so many people are on vacation anyway. Now we just did a new blog this morning, and we're kind of ramping up for the fall.
Great. Joe, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to talk to our listeners.
No worries. Thank you very much, Rich. Thanks for having me.